Hello, welcome back to Yellow Brick Road Rash. I wrote this in response to a post on Facebook, and I thought I would try to tie in it as we close out this discussion of the holographic universe. Fear is itself not a bad thing. It is of a primal nature, as we have discussed, and it is intended to keep us safe. But unlike days when we were living in tribes, we're now forced by modernity to live amongst other or others who don't see the world the way we do. And that leads to an inherent distrust lingering among all of us on a daily basis. Distrust is born out of fear. It keeps us all separate and fragmented, back to wanting to live like tribal beasts, huddled down in the brush, waiting for the next incursion from our enemies, which goes against the very essence of who we are in God's eyes. As we have discovered together here in this exploration of the holographic universe, our fundamental nature is to be whole in our bodies, whole in our communities, whole in our ecosystems, whole in the world, and mostly whole in our hearts. But being whole doesn't mean all of us being alike. It means being different, but able to live alongside each other with compassion, individuated, not individualized, being more than the sum of our parts together, being able to understand we are each on our own journey forward. That is how we grow out of the tribal mentality towards who we are supposed to be in God's eyes. That requires trust, it requires love and knowledge that there is a bigger picture than what we can perceive as humans who only see a small fraction of visible light. It requires serving chicken and corn from the farm to strangers in need. Any other message is not God's message, folks. But does God really have a message? Does God or Source really have likes and dislikes or a plan? From what I'm reading based on scientific data, it looks like a plan would be kind of a strong word, more like a framework. And no, I don't think likes or dislikes is appropriate, more like positive and negative feedback loops. You raise your vibration and you light the world, sort of thing. I think that's awesome. We are all on an important journey, but in broken down cars, my friends, each one of us. The journey isn't towards wealth, safety, acceptance. It is ultimately towards knowledge or knowing from where you came and to where you will return, and trying to figure out how to get there in that broken vehicle. Every single human being on this planet is on that same journey. And who are any single one of us to deny anyone else the road forward to realizing that goal, even if the road they are on makes no sense to us? I am not your judge, and you are not mine. I don't need to preach to you the advantages of regular vehicle maintenance. I need to listen to what you need and help you fix it so you can be back on the road again. As I've mentioned before in a previous chapter, in the story The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy stops along the way to invite others to join her on her journey to see the wizard. She takes the time out of her own trek to hear their stories and invites them along, straw, oil, and all. These characters were unfamiliar to her, and yet she and her glowing red slippers, aka life force, opened the door of possibility to them as well. They supported each other, defended each other, and even spoke up to the gatekeeper who tried to turn them away together. But in the essence of the cultural conversations we need to be having today, take a look at each of those four very different sojourners. Each have different needs, wants, histories, biologies, if any, lifestyles, problems, but they are all on that same journey we are on to wholeness and to home. It isn't about getting help from the wizard, it's about becoming whole. There was no wizard. I've decided to wrap up this book. We've covered the main points, and because of the cultural atmosphere we are in, I want to move on to something more poetically inspiring, not politically. But in conclusion, if proponents of holographic theory are correct, this world is a sort of illusion. It's a patterned image, much like a hologram, born from frequency vibrations that exist across infinity in a dimension way more fundamental than this one. It's our playground and our science experiment as infinite creatures who ultimately exist beyond space and time. However, there appear to be rules to the game, rules that we aren't privy to know in this life and won't be even in the next or the next. That creates a framework in which we must inherently adhere to. Apparently, however, we are free to make choices that can nudge or bend those rules. In this way, we sort of partner with the depths of our innermost soul, which is in essence an extension of God or Source, to create the life that we know here on earth. If there is already a framework in place, what would happen if we just spent more time in flow, raising our vibration and letting a lot of the stress go? What would that look like? I gotta say, the amount of energy zapping stress that we are allowing ourselves to bear is going to cause illness, and we will not raise the vibration of the planet if we are all on even more anti anxiety drugs when we don't need to be. Huddled in our tribes, trying to anticipate the next incursion. Our only way out of this, folks, is up the emotional scale. This is a mechanism for entraining your vibrations to the highest level possible for you. Not everyone will reach the top, but the goal is to try. And by doing so, you may find peace. How the emotional scale or ladder works. Identify your emotional state and find it on the chart. Want to move up and out of that state to feel better? Then look at the layer just above the one you're in. Can you find a way to change your perspective just enough to be able to identify with that layer instead? Keep your focus on just bringing your emotion up to that level. And when that level is achieved, sit with it. Keep working your way up that pyramid in that way with the goal of raising your lowest vibration to the highest possible layer over time. This works on individual troublesome issues, negative pattern traits, as well as just general demeanor. It can work for everyone, but you mustn't try to move up more than 2 levels at a time on any given issue. That is mostly our problem. We try to go from depressed to happy in one giant step, which usually doesn't work and sets you back even farther. Try to remember that you are essentially raising your vibration as you move up the chart. The lower you are on the chart, the more dissonant your vibration will feel to you. Lower vibrations literally work against your normal vibrating field, and those at the bottom are the hardest to break free from. But with that focused attention, you can and will find success. It takes a lot of emotional maturity to want to resolve your negative low vibration. But man, it also takes a whopping amount of energy to stay at those low vibrating levels. Imagine the energy you will free up if you can learn to move up the ladder. Please let me know what you think about this technique or anything else you would like to chat about. You can comment here, subscribe, like this channel, like this episode, join me on Patreon. Lots of places to connect. So, where are we going to go next? I want to maybe briefly discuss Eckhart Tolle and his book called The Power of Now. I have to admit, I read this a while ago, and honestly, I was thinking about foregoing it for more quantum stuff, but I think you will find this good for your soul. I know I did. The time is just right, and I know firsthand this book has changed lives. If you find my summary valuable to you, please be sure and go pick up a copy. It is also available on Audible, and I'll have the links below in the show notes. Pain is unconscious resistance to what is by the mind. The more you identify with your mind, the more you suffer. When processing through mind or thought, everything comes through as judgment. Thought is ego. How many of you process judgmental thoughts in the background all day long? That is your ego making judgments about essentially your safety. That's one of the things your mind is there for, your safety. Is a tiger chasing you? No. Emotions are the body's reaction to your mind. What message is body receiving from the mind? Danger? Then fear is generated. It comes through as negativity. And man, have I lived in that negativity zone. I have let my resting bitch face determine how other people saw me. There have been many times in my life when I was living in these planes of negative existence. But fundamentally, I was hurting, either physically or emotionally or both. And a lot of this was based on fear. And I'm not talking in my case about any kind of abuse. Well, maybe I am, self abuse. That is, until I came to terms with the fact that my life needed to change. I needed to stop functioning out of fear. And I was the only one that was going to be able to make that happen. Unfortunately, it often takes drastic changes to break those bad patterns of behavior. And that sucks. Wouldn't it be nice if we knew there were tools available that could save us from ourselves before we made a wreck of things because of all that fear? But honestly, it's as if we were built to take our greatest leaps after suffering. What if it didn't have to be this way, though? What if we could move ourselves up that emotional scale and find happiness without moving to another state or country? Or what if we could just sit with the now and make peace with it? Making peace with the now doesn't mean you have to like it. It means you have come to terms with the fact that now is all there is. It's what you do with it that matters. There is no past. What if we didn't have printed words or pictures? What if we only communicated what was verbally? Would the past hold as much weight? They say remembering how things were in the past is what causes depression. If everything is an illusion and we make things real by consensus reality, then all the past is a consensus agreement with everyone in your world, community, family about what took place. But even if every family member recalls a particular Christmas gathering and can tell the same story about Aunt Jean spilling wine on her white dress, did they all have the exact same experience of it? No. At the very least, each one of us saw it happen from a different angle in the room. What we perceived from that moment came from all of the expressions and reactions in the room, but not from one angle. Everyone's description of what happened would be unique. For grins, let's add in everyone's past experiences. One person is thinking, well, duh, she wore a white dress because it had happened to her already. She knew what that felt like. While another is thinking, what a shame to lose that pricey wine with a spill. And yet another is thinking, boy, did she deserve that. Do we all really perceive anything from the past the same way? I don't think so. And apparently not according to quantum physics. In reality, nothing exists except vibrational frequencies that are happening right here, right now, in this moment. But did the present change because of those past perspectives? And the answer is yes. Similarly, they say that worrying about what may happen in the future causes anxiety as opposed to depression. That makes so much sense. But let's look at the future for a minute. What is it exactly? It's a mixed bag of possibilities. That's it, period. Does not yet exist according to quantum physics, and there is no way to predict what will happen if all the present is vibration to infinity and beyond. How in the world could we predict anything? Well, okay, other than using mathematical equations, but that's for another YouTuber to discuss. But seriously, we can look at patterns and make an educated guess. But you can't know with absolute certainty. Putting our mind in the future while our body is in the present causes huge amounts of anxiety as we try to integrate the two perspectives. But guess what? It isn't possible and causes dissonance and pain and fear. Stop trying to predict the future. All you can do is recognize now, right now, then take action if needed. There isn't even a consensus reality of the future because it hasn't happened yet. But if we are the creators of our future, then what does that mean about what manifests? If we all keep visualizing what we think will happen, does it make it happen? Let me put it another way. Gene Roddenberry imagined the tricorder in the 1960s. He imagined it. We all watched Star Trek. Well, many or most of us did. We perpetuated the idea that now that would be a cool thing to have. Well, we have tricorder like clinical tools being used bedside today. Did a scientist see the tricorder and think, wow, I want to make this happen? Or did the collective conscious over time create a consensus enough around the idea of that tool that over time one was developed? That may not be a great example. I don't know. But quantum physics tells us that we create our reality and groups of people create consensus reality. Think about that. The power of now ditches the need for all of this discussion, though. It aims to teach you to be in this moment because this moment is truly all we have. I like to think of the present as being like a pair of knitting needles. The past is the knitted piece trailing to the floor, and the future is the ball of yarn sitting in your lap waiting to become part of something much bigger. The past has been knitted into existence as a web of knots that represents the thoughts and experiences and material world we have each created for ourselves. It represents who we are in this moment, defined by the past, while the ball of yarn represents your own pure potential, one strand bound to itself over and over again to create something complex, colorful, and beautiful. But the knitting needles, that's where the action's at. That's where the decisions are made as to whether the piece will be a beanie or a scarf. The present is always right there at those needles, deciding with each knot what the end product is going to look like. What has already been knitted is only a brief consideration. What the yarn is doing inside that giant ball is pretty inconsequential, except to make sure you have enough. All that matters is what type of knot you're going to make, knit or purl, and how well you do it. The more you accept the now, the more you will contribute to the end of suffering. The more you concentrate on the needles and the knot you are making, the more coherent the end result will be. Surrender to what is, allow the present moment to be, take action if necessary, accept, then act, knit, then purl. Work with it. Does this mean accepting everything happening in the world right now as being okay? No. It means accept what is happening right now for you as the only thing that is real. Leave the past behind and don't try to predict the future. The only thing you need to consider is what action you're going to take. Knit or purl over and over again. What are you going to create? Next, I want to turn to the crux of today's chapter, the emotional pain body. It is the residue of pain created from what is unresolved. Accumulated pain becomes a negative energy field that occupies your mind and body. It is the result of accumulated, unresolved trauma from this life and any or all past lives. We all have an emotional pain body, and many of us are identifying with ours right this very minute. The emotional pain body exists in two phases, dormant and active. We're going to talk about the active one. Anything can trigger the active phase. When you enter the active phase, everything in your life becomes negative. There seems to be a need to have drama in your relationships, accompanied by anger, rage, reactivity. A few years ago, I was exhausted by trying to be a square peg in a round hole. Some things you just don't know until you try them. I'm a reasonably extroverted person, or rather, I know how to be when it's necessary, but I learned that knowing how to be doesn't mean I am comfortable being it. My husband and I decided to open a tiny wine bar in our small town. Before we knew it, we added a cafe. A year later, I was a walking pile of anxiety and depression with a bad back and aching feet. I wore a frown every day, which, to be honest, isn't hard when you have resting bitch face. But I'm pretty sure no one wanted to be around me. Heck, I didn't even want to be around me. But I was no longer vibrating at my normal frequency. Even though I started out wanting to be a tuning fork, I ended up unable to keep up my resonant frequency because my body was in pain. I was not in flow, and I never ever wanted to be running a restaurant, especially not single handedly. But heck, I thought I would try it to see. Everything, and I mean everything in my life became a challenge. I was seeking meaning in my life, but I had no direction to turn. I'd begun playing the victim in my relationships without any sense of how to get a grip on it. Finally, one day, I said, no more. I'm not doing this anymore. And I closed the cafe. I had created something that was awesome and people loved it. But I was losing myself to serving others with no way to create balance for myself. I went back to working with my husband in the bar, but had really begun to resent just the whole thing. The counseling role that bartenders easily get caught up in, the smell of the building, the wine, the limitations, the regulations, and the wheels that were spinning in giant ruts that were my life. We tried other options, then finally closed, deciding being poor was better than working ourselves to the bone to be almost poor. Kidding, not kidding. We all get stuck in these places, don't we? One thing has changed for sure, and that's how much I tip my service workers. My God, that work is some bullshit. Love you guys. Anyway, if I'm reading Tolle's message correctly, my emotional pain body was activated by doing that work, being in that space. I will say, years before that, I had been licensed as an esthetician, and you would have thought I'd learned about how I needed to create balance in my own life when serving others, but nope. In both cases, I burned out and very fast. But that decision forced us to find flow. We are creators, and that's my proclamation. We are creators. Here I am. Enough about me sitting here doing my dream job. Still poor, by the way. Now let's get back to the emotional pain body. Indigenous people call it Watiko, and you'll hear me talk about that more in another episode. The pain body wants to survive. Watch for signs of it in yourself: unhappiness, irritation, impatience, anger, rage, depression, need for drama. Once you start identifying with these emotions and being these things, the emotional pain body has taken hold. Catch it early, folks. It can only survive if you identify with it. It will live through you. It will feed on the experiences that help it resonate with its own kind of energy. When it has taken you over, it will cause anger, destructiveness, and illness. It creates its own perpetuating energy. Pain feeds on pain. Once taken over, you want more pain and you want to inflict or suffer pain. The emotional pain body wants to keep the pain going if you aren't conscious of it. It's a dark shadow of the ego, afraid of the light of consciousness. It survives on your unconscious fear of facing the pain that lives in you. And if you don't acknowledge it, you will live the fear, anger, depression, etc., over and over again. It's a phantom aspect of ego that can't prevail if you are the owner of your presence. It is only an illusion. The pain body doesn't want you to see it, though. The moment you observe it, the identification is broken. Be present with it. Don't try to analyze it, just see it. You are now the watcher of the pain body. It can no longer use you by pretending to be you. It can't feed off of you. You have access to the power of now. St. Paul said, everything is shown up by being exposed to the light. Whatever is exposed becomes light. You can't fight the pain body. Just watch it. Accept it as part of what is in that moment. By acknowledging it, you reduce it to an emotion without making it who you are. We've talked a little bit about the shadow. Same thing. The emotional pain body is also trapped life energy. It splits off from your main energy field, becomes temporarily autonomous with mind identification. It turns on itself, eating its tail like the Ouroboros. It is honestly a destructive life force. Please disidentify with it. It may eventually create aches and pains once it's recognized, but if you stay present, be the guardian of inner space, it will stay in the inactive stage. If you become unconscious in anger, the pain body will enter in. You become vulnerable as you open yourself to vibrating at that frequency. If you're still unconscious, it becomes an emotional pattern that is absent of a watcher. It will embed itself in your psyche. It makes me think of multiple personality disorder and how one alter can take over the group. Another similar aspect is the fact that the longer you identify with the emotional pain body, the harder it is likely to break free of it. I can imagine in the end, it could destroy you. When you identify with your emotional pain body, you would rather be in pain than risk losing your unhappy self. Do you know people like that? Observe your resistance and attachment to that pain. Observe your compulsion to think about it. Then take your attention into the pain body and say, I see you. Only you can do this. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's so important. Counteract the pain body by being with someone who is conscious and not in that same vibration. You will begin to resonate with their frequency. Therapists can help you do this, but so can anyone who has a calming nature and is calming to you. So, how does fear arise? What is it exactly? You don't need fear to avoid danger, you need knowledge. If threatened, the shrinking back from danger, that's fear. Psychological fear isn't immediate danger, dread, phobia, etc. We experience fear about the future, and that causes anxiety because you are here while your mind is in the future. The only place where you have power is in the here and now. Be the watcher of your emotions. Be the watcher of your emotional pain body. Acknowledge them, but don't become them. Be here in the now and act on what is now, knit or purl. You can cope with the present moment, but you can't cope with something that is only mind projection. When you're trying to identify with mind, ego controls your life. Here is an example of identifying with your ego. You have the need to be right. And if you identify with the need to be right, it affects every aspect of your life. The mind always fears death is just around the corner. Even being argumentative is an act of fearing death, because if you're wrong and you lose face, your mind based sense of self is threatened with annihilation. You try to make the other person wrong to defend your egoic mental position. You have a mind based sense of self, so you can't afford to be wrong, which would mean death for your ego. Disidentify from your mind. No need to be right or wrong. Being right is a form of violence. You can disagree, but not as an identity. What about defensiveness? What are you defending? An illusion? Witness it and make it conscious. End all arguments. Power over others is weakness garbed as strength. Identify with mind means you are disconnected from your true self. In this state, you will have fear as constant companion. Most are in a constant state of fear. Only the few enlightened souls live in a fearless state. So, most of the world is dealing with fear just as you are. Another emotional aspect is inferiority, not being whole. There's two aspects of this: not being worthy or good enough, which is a conscious place to be experiencing that deep lack or incompleteness. But there's also craving and wanting, and that is unconscious aspect, entering into compulsive pursuit of ego satisfaction. Things to identify with in order to fill this hole to feel better and more complete. But the hole remains and it's bottomless. It gets difficult to ignore. You can't be at peace if mind is running your life. Ego derived sense of self that needs to identify with external things: job, power, political party, money, possessions, status, knowledge, looks, relationships, history. It's all temporary satisfaction. None of these is who you are inherently. It may even be what you love, but it isn't you. You will have to relinquish this way of identifying yourself. You will know it even if it isn't until you feel death approaching. The goal is to die before you die. Death is stripping away of all that is not you. And then you will find there is no death. And that, my friends, is freaking beautiful. So, how can we integrate Dorothy's story into this discussion? At any point, are any of the characters practicing the power of now? I think we have been looking at the story all wrong. We saw Kansas as reality and Oz as a dream. But what if we turn this around and say Oz is Dorothy's reality and Kansas represents Dorothy in her undifferentiated primordial state, not yet living the life she was meant to live? Dorothy in the implicate order? We could then say Dorothy was birthed into Oz, which isn't untrue. And when she left Oz, she died, as far as those people were concerned, and left that realm never to return, but once again returning to the implicate order or home. She took that ultimate return trip. If any of my kiddos are watching, you can guarantee I will be assuming the role of Dorothy as I leave this earthly plane. Well, I didn't mean for this to go to such a dark place, but I wanted to share a different perspective with you about reality. Eckhart Tolle reverberates the basic message in the holographic universe. Now, in whatever shape or form that means, is all there is. There is no past except what is in our minds, pictures, and letters, and there is no future either. To overcome the stress of any given moment, your job is to acknowledge what is now. and perhaps work with the emotional scale to try and work with yourself in that moment to feel better. Because the truth is, that is literally all there is. Knit and purl.
Hi. I hope this episode actually gave you some tools to use no matter what struggles you are having right now. Hopefully, you'll be able to utilize the emotional ladder or scale to work your way up and out of that stress. I just wanted to add that I know this has been a really hard week for some of us, but it's important that we get our footing and that we don't let the curse of negativity take hold of us, and do what we can to raise our vibrations. It's really important. If we're not vibrating at a higher frequency, then we're not participating in the world fully or in the universe. So do what you can to put yourself in a better place. Be out in nature, be with the people you enjoy, be with the people and you feel kindred spirit with, really. That's what we're really talking about here. It's vibrating together, the synergistic vibrations. And I know if you haven't listened to all my videos, you're like, what's all this vibration stuff? But seriously, in quantum physics, it's a thing. So if you're not sure, please go back and watch all of my videos from the very beginning, and maybe you'll get another glimpse of what that really means. I'm still struggling with it myself, actually. But I think all the tools that we can use to try to climb out of this place of feeling hopeless and helpless are important, even if it might be something a little bit out of your comfort zone, like vibrating. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you being here. All right. Good night.